something that could have a major impact for the U.S. economy. More than 100,000 railroad workers are threatening to go on strike. Now, if this happens, passenger service, supply chains, jobs and supporting industries could be crippled, costing the economy $2 billion a day. Now, the deadline for the deal is at 12:01 a.m. Friday morning. But some long-distance Amtrak services could be suspended as early as today.
Obviously, a railroad strike at this point in time would be extraordinarily detrimental to our economy and to the American people, and we want to avoid that.
Now, lawmakers are working to avert this strike, which is over worker pay, health care, and other issues. President Joe Biden is also in direct talks with the unions. And get this, railroads carry 40% of the nation's long-haul shipments. So a railroad strike stops those goods literally in their tracks. We'll keep you updated as this story does develop.
President, this afternoon, I come here with genuine concern about the possibility of the failure to resolve a railroad labor management dispute. And I express my support for that resolution. I represent a state, the state of Kansas, its people, America's largest supplier of wheat, and a top leader in agricultural markets of many other crops. I can tell you that a labor strike would disrupt the stability of our ag markets and could prove catastrophic to our global food supply. At a time in which hunger is rampant around the world, again, one of the last things we need is more difficulties in getting agriculture commodities and food to people around the globe who are looking for a meal tonight. In my state, corn, soybeans, grain, sorghum, that harvest is underway, and farmers need to be able to ship their crops by train around the country and to our ports where the grain will be sent to feed that hungry world. In parts of Kansas facing severe drought, feed yards, places that we feed cattle, are shipping grain in from other areas of the country to feed their livestock. Rail service is critical to making sure these producers are able to get the feed they need and to keep their livestock fed and healthy. The U.S. rail network moves critical agricultural commodities across the nation, and a complete shutdown of the rail system would result in devastating consequences across an already weak supply chain. The Association of American Railroads found that a nationwide rail shutdown could idle more than 7,000 trains and lose more than $2 billion a day in missed economic output. As the deadline approaches, we are already seeing the impact of a contingency planning by railways, showing that a full shutdown would be totally unacceptable. With the trucking industry and other transportation systems already at their maximum capacity, there is no alternative plan that could mitigate the losses in case of a rail transportation strike and that rail service coming to an end. I have been in regular contact with our rail leaders, including those at Union Pacific and the Kansas City Southern, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and I continue to urge all parties to reach an agreement. Our constituents deserve certainty that will come from reaching that agreement. In the event of that a conclusion is not reached, I will utilize my opportunities as a member of the Senate, as a member of Congress, for congressional intervention and work to shield the impact of a rail shutdown across the nation.
Glenn, hi. From major auto plants to mom and pop retailers, many depend on freight railroads to deliver products. Now, the Association of American Railroads says if shipments are halted, the economic loss could be at least $2 billion a day, and passenger trains will be affected too. Amtrak recently announced that some of its routes will be canceled, and Metrolink said that they're also preparing for a possible strike on Friday.
Keep me moving, please.
Train riders are hoping the disruptions will be short-lived.
Definitely, it would impact me a lot if the Amtrak is not running.
Freight railroads and workers' unions have been in a lengthy negotiation over pay and working conditions. Amtrak says while this negotiation does not directly involve their workforce, many of Amtrak's passenger trains operate on freight railroad tracks. Those freight tracks likely won't be available if there's a widespread strike on Friday. And just in case, Amtrak temporarily suspended some of its service.
You don't want passengers to be stranded. And in the middle of nowhere because they were traveling, Friday night, and then bam, the dispatcher goes on strike. So they're doing the sensible thing here, but our hope is that it is a very short and temporary suspension.
Take a look. Amtrak says it will only operate trains this week that have enough time to reach their final destination by midnight Friday. Suspended services starting Tuesday will affect several routes, including Southwest Chief and California Zephyr. And on Wednesday, suspended services will impact these routes, including the Coast Starlight, which runs through Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Sacramento.
Most of the trains in California run over host railroads, which are owned by freight companies. And so if they shut down, so does Amtrak, so does Metrolink.
Metrolink spokesperson Scott Johnson.
Oftentimes, Metrolink riders are unaware that they are on a BNSF or Union Pacific track. They're simply on a Metrolink train. This is one of those situations where our collaboration with our freight partners could lead to a negative situation.
Metrolink says portions of Orange County, Inland Empire, 91 Paris Valley, Riverside, and Ventura County lines could see complete or partial cancellation starting Friday. A White House official told the Washington Post that President Joe Biden reached out to union leaders and rail companies Monday, pressing for a deal to avert a national railroad strike. Reporting live at Union Station, Kimberly Chang, KTLA 5 News.
You can't tell what's inside.
We're going to come over here and look at this train full of...
But Snohomish County Public Works Director Kelly Snyder knows if this train doesn't move, it's a problem.
We don't know if we're going to get more containers. We don't know if they're going to come and get this train. It's very unreliable at this moment.
The container holds solid waste, everything from food to furniture. They're supposed to be transported daily to a landfill in eastern Washington, but she says a slew of rail service problems means it's not happening.
That's where that service level has been diminishing since January. It was so much so that we had to pile up solid waste during the months of April and May.
This is what the county's solid waste facility looked like in early May, a 45-foot pile. It prompted health, safety, and environmental concerns. And according to Snyder,
we are starting to build that pile again.
That's problem number one. Piled on top of that is the possible railroad worker strike.
We're dependent on rail, and when that service level diminishes, that's when we have to figure out alternative ways.
Right now, a strike means the county would need to shut down its solid waste transfer stations. It would impact curbside pickup and recycling.
If we're shut down, we reserve some capacity for certain types of uses throughout the county. Hospitals come to mind, schools come to mind.
But she says the overall impact would be significant. A strike could start as soon as Friday. The county will wait to see if that happens. And in the meantime, they hope that this train heads out Wednesday morning.
So it's really important for us to make sure that we get the word out about anything that might impact that daily visit.
Today, the world emits about 60 gigatons of greenhouse gas a year to power the economy and our lives. So think the food we eat, how we get places, where we work, how we live. And we can't turn all of that off overnight. But we can take steps to get on a path toward a net zero world.
Net zero is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions so that over time we can achieve an overall balance between emissions produced and the emissions removed from the overall atmosphere.
So for every ton of greenhouse gas we emit into the air, we would take a ton out. The latest science shows that if we reach net zero by mid-century, essentially if we achieve the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement, it would limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius versus pre-industrial levels. If we exceed that level, scientists say that we'll suffer from the most detrimental climate impact.
To date, 127 governments around the world and over 1,000 companies have made or are preparing to make net zero commitments.
This is also being reflected in the financial system. Regulators are making climate risk disclosure mandatory, central banks are stress testing for climate risk, and policymakers around the world are collaborating to achieve common climate goals. Climate change is a collective problem that requires collective global action. People have to understand that achieving net zero in 2050 isn't something that we can start in 2049. We have to start today. Lastly, and most importantly, as with any transition, we really have to work together to make sure that no one group, whether it's a community or an industry, gets disproportionately left behind. The bottom line is that achieving global net zero by 2050 is our best chance at mitigating the worst impacts of climate change. This is going to be a large structural change in our economy, and companies that manage to evolve and adapt their business models are going to be rewarded by the financial markets over the long term.
There's a good chance you've never heard of BlackRock. Founded in only 1988, in less than 30 years, this American financial firm would grow to become the company that owns the world, managing assets worth $6.3 trillion. These are assets that belong to their clients, mainly the pension funds of ordinary people, teachers, police officers, nurses, and many more. And that's just the beginning. BlackRock has also developed a software platform called Aladdin to perform risk analysis for its clients. It receives sensitive data from banks, insurance companies, and other important institutions. Through Aladdin, BlackRock has insights about the management of financial assets worth another $20 trillion. BlackRock also has shares and voting rights in many of the biggest European companies, in sectors such as energy, oil and gas, transportation, food, and of course, finance. The company holds public debt in the form of bonds and has real estate interests. And still, there's more. Our Rock, you see, wears many hats. Aside from being an investor, it is also an auditor and an advisor. Governments and central banks invite a BlackRock subsidiary called BlackRock Solutions to audit them and to provide advice about the management and rescue of banks. Yet at the same time, BlackRock is often a major shareholder in these same banks. In other words, the company often sits on both sides of the table. BlackRock Solutions gets privileged access to highly sensitive information that could be valuable to BlackRock itself. Does this constitute a conflict of interest? No, says BlackRock, which claims that the company has established Chinese walls between its different subsidiaries. In January 2018, BlackRock's founder and chairman, Larry Fink, sent a letter to all of the CEOs of the companies BlackRock is invested in, asking them to do more than deliver financial performance and make a positive contribution to society. So BlackRock not only owns the world, it also wants to save it?
We have some parts of the country that are very, very worried about how this transition will mean for their state, their locality, for their jobs. And so this is not going to be an easy task. But I would say across the board, capital is moving, and it's going to move very rapidly. And I'm very proud that I can tell you right now, every hydrocarbon company in the United States is now focused on this. Whereas I would say 3-4 years ago, they weren't. They did not believe it. And so we are making change. And I would say we're making more rapid change because of Bill and other people who are expressing this openly.
The bulk of emissions in the decades ahead will come from developing countries. Let's think of it in 3 tiers. The rich countries, that's Europe, US, Japan. The middle-income countries, that's where most of humanity lives. That's China on the high end, high middle income, and India on the low end. And you've got Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, Vietnam, a lot of the world's population there. And then you have some very poor countries, a lot in Africa. The responsibility to innovate rests entirely on the rich countries, and particularly on the US, because the US has the universities, the national labs, it's got the ability to organize risk-oriented capital. So we will not solve climate change without the rich world driving down dramatically. That's what will make it economic for the middle-income countries who are not responsible for the historic emissions and who are dealing with more basic needs.
The fourth industrial revolution will impact our lives completely. It will not only change how we communicate, how we produce, how we consume, it will change actually us, our own identity, and of course gives life to such policies and developments like smart traffic, smart government, smart cities. What we will see is that everything will be integrated into an ecosystem driven by big data and driven particularly by close cooperation also of governments with business, civil society. And this revolution will come at a breathtaking speed. It will be like a tsunami. And actually, it's not just a digital revolution, it's digital, of course physical with nanotechnology, but it's also biological. And those 3 dimensions provides a particular force to this revolution. So what the World Economic Forum is doing is to promote this public-private cooperation to master the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution will have multifold impacts. Of course, every industry will be digitalized, will be disintermediated, and has to define a new business model. But it's not only business which is affected, it's government which has to move over to agile government, it is society as a whole, with the danger of job losses, but also with the need to reskill and upskill people fast. So there's an impact on society. So we will have to prepare very well for this revolution. And I feel that the Asian countries with a relatively young population can manage and master this revolution easier compared to other countries in the world. What is particularly important is the educational system. We have to change the educational system, which is still very much anchored. Even in the 19th century, we have to adapt it to the need to change continuously, for example, jobs. So the new educational system has not only been aiming at developing digital capabilities, and I should add ethical norms, that it also has to be based on a lifelong educational system.
It was very clear over my career. I witnessed 5 or 6 different crises. Some of them were quite severe. All of them were financial in nature, whether it was maybe a high yield crisis or a dot-com crisis or the Thai crisis of 97, 98, the real estate crises and the Great Recession crisis, they were all financial in nature. And we were all able to mitigate these crises and reduce the severity through monetary policy. So the world has this network of central banks, and in unison, all the central banks were trying to correct this financial difficulty. And in most cases, the duration of these crises were short in nature. Sometimes they were very severe. Many families were impacted, but they were short in nature. When you start thinking about the climate change impact and whether you believe in 5% of the science or 100% of the science, we don't have a global government body to arrest this problem. This is going to require every government, small and large, to start finding ways of mitigating it.
ready. Safety engineer ready, and ready to engage. 3, 2, 1.
Autonomous driving started.
Slow traffic up ahead.
Copy that. Right on time. Good to see you guys.